name is Amina Menkan, and I'll be taking you through the presentation today to walk you through some of the policy changes that we are proposing for the last bundle of our official plan review. As you may be aware, we have been undertaking the review of the city's official plan, especially if you are new to this and you're joining us tonight. It has started a few years back. The official plan, as you may know, is a long-term land use document that contains policies and directions guiding the growth and the development of the city through a long period of time. An official plan reflects provincial directions and implements provincial priorities such as housing, climate change, growth, and infrastructure development. It also helps us align with regional priorities and regional directions and policies. An official plan also contains the policies that address priorities within the city. We have our own priorities when it comes to addressing climate change, housing, and making the city a thriving and attractive place to live. Tonight, though, we will be mostly focusing on housing as it applies to the policies that have been shared. Last but not least, an official plan also review is a great opportunity for us to revise and simplify the city's official plan and increase certainty and legibility of its policies to ensure it accurately reflects the vision of the city. Next slide, please, Brandon. So we've been doing this for a while, and we'd like to remind everybody about what changed since we last met. Since we started the review process, there was a number of changes that have immediately impacted both the content and the timeline of the review of the official plan. These changes happened both at the regional and the provincial level. So for instance, at the regional level, since we've met last year, the regional official plan has now come into force in effect and has been approved by the province November 4th. That means that major transit station areas now are completed, boundaries and densities are set. The city now can have its inclusionary zoning policies in place, and also that we can now implement the housing targets and policies that the regional official plan has. Thank you, Brandon. In addition to changes to the changes at the regional level, there was a number of changes at the provincial level. Those include most recently during the span of 2022 and 2023, a lot of bills that have been released that you can see on the screen in front of you. For instance, Bill 109, which significantly changed the approval process timeline. Bill 23, one of the most substantive changes to the Planning Act, which touched on environmental and housing policies. Perhaps the most important of the changes that affect our talk today is the permission or the mandate for municipalities such as Mississauga to allow up to 3 units within the same structure. And most recently, the province released Bill 97, which is still in the proposal phase. It aims to make changes to employment lands, which could reduce the city's ability to preserve areas dedicated to employment uses. There are also significant changes coming, including the repeal of the growth plan and the replacement of the provincial policy statement into a document that's now, I think, called the provincial planning statement. So many of these changes may significantly impact our work, and that's why it is important tonight for us to highlight them. Staff have written a number of extensive reports to Council on each one of those changes. So if you'd like to learn more about these bills or any change that the province has introduced, Trista and team can put the link to those reports. You just have to let us know which one you'd like to learn more about. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we stand in the process as a whole, as Aaron has said at the beginning, we have released 2 bundles of policies, and bundles are packages of policies that we have worked on. So the first bundle was in the beginning of 2022. It looked at policies and themes related to growth management, environment, and climate change. The second was released in mid-2022, and that one looked at cultural heritage, infrastructure, transportation, and economy. And now we are releasing the last of those bundles, which will deal with housing, land use, and area-specific policies such as strategic growth areas. So we have held at each step of the process community meetings, similar to the one we have tonight, And at every one of those meetings and following the posting of policies, we have received comments from you as well as other stakeholders, such as members of the development industry, public entities, and indigenous nations. All of the feedback that we have received so far has been considered and integrated as fits in the policies. So your feedback tonight is very important in order to continue to inform and enrich the process. Today we are, as I said, at the end of the process of releasing those kind of phased or packaged policies. So we aim to have the last package on the site until end of July, so we can receive your comments. And then after that, we'll start to work on the final document, which we intend to release in September, October. And I'll speak to that at the end of this presentation. Next, please. So what's in the package or the bundle 3? So there is a lot of information, and we recognize that there's content that is extensive that's been put out there. And that's why we needed to have a meeting to kind of discuss the main elements of this. So I'll read just through the chapters that have been received, that have been posted as part of bundle 3. So we have posted chapter 5, housing, chapter 10, land use designations, chapter 11, major transit station areas, chapter 12, urban growth center, chapter 13, nodes, chapter 14, neighborhoods, chapter 15, general employment areas, chapter 16, special site policies, as well as local area plans, which include Port Credit, Lakeview, and South Down, and the final kind of glossary for the OP. We also posted a number of schedules for you to look into, as well as an online map that I will speak in detail to later in the presentation. Next, Brandon, please. So it is clear that there's a lot of information out there. So to better utilize your time and to hear your thoughts, we will not go through all the chapters and all the schedules as presented. Instead, we will lump them into themes, 3 main policy themes that we feel that you can give or we can have meaningful discussions around. So the first theme being new residential land use designations as well as housing policies. The second being an updated employment area policies, and this is just something that we will touch on. And then finally, we'll also touch on the restructuring of strategic growth area policy frameworks. Next. So let's look at the land use designation. So before we get into current versus proposed and what's changing and why we're changing it, we thought we will just take a moment to define what a land use designation is and really understand how it functions. A land use designation within an official plan, whether the city of Mississauga or any other plan, is an important tool that describes what and how we can build on a parcel of land or a lot. It essentially describes the use of the land, whether it is residential, as you can see on the map, employment, mixed use, or whether it can just remain as an open space, park, or a utility area. And in certain instances, the residential land use designation also speaks to, the residential land use designation also speaks to the intensity of the use. So for example, it could be a residential high density, it could be a residential low density, etc. So it speaks to the density of it as well as the use. Land use designations are very important tools because they inform permitted uses at the zoning level. An area that's designated residential usually translates into residential zones in the zoning bylaw. And this is very important to the discussion tonight. And we'll see why. Next slide, please. So there is a close relationship between the official plan and the zoning bylaw. The official plan usually speaks to the overall or the general kind of guidelines for the way we build, while the zoning bylaw goes into the detail. So we're using the analogy of the box versus the house in of itself. On the left of the screen, you can see what the general official plan designation does. It really speaks to whether you can build a residential versus an industrial, whereas and how many stories, the density targets, versus the zoning bylaw that really goes into the detail of the type of building. Is it a detached? Is it a semi-detached? The location of it, is it meant to be close to the road, further away from the road, depending on the setbacks? It also speaks to lot coverage. Is it 30%, 40%, number of units, sometimes height in meters? We speak in detail also in terms of garages, driveways, permeable surfaces. So the detail that goes into the zoning bylaw really should not be in the official plan. And the reason why I mentioned this tonight is because as we will go into discussing the way our current official plan is, we'll see that some of that detail has found its way in the official plan and is making it difficult for us to create new housing options in the city. So this hierarchy is very important between the zoning and the official plan. It really allows us to differentiate between complex development applications and simple ones. It differentiates between needing small variances or having to rezone completely a property or having to change the official plan. This notion is very important because when an official plan becomes too detailed, changes that can be perceived as minor or small can trigger the need to amend the official plan. And amending an official plan is always an onerous, complex, and very long process. So this is something that we need to look at in terms of whether that change really requires us to amend the official plan, or should it just amend the zoning or do something else? So this is, again, a notion that's very important because of how our current official plan is structured. And we'll see that through the next slide, if you don't mind, Brandon. So this is what our current land use designation looks like. It is a land use designation that uses building type or built form. So if you see, we have 4 categories. The yellow is a low density one that permits detached, semi-detached, and duplexes, but for the most part only permits detached and semis. The low density 2, which is the light orange, permits detached, semi-detached, some form of street towns, and plexes. But again, for the most part, it permits only detached and semi-detached. And then we move into the bright orange one at the top, which permits all types of townhouses and sometimes apartment buildings up to 4 stories. And then we move into the high density one, which is where our apartment buildings are. So the low density 1 and the low density 2, so the light orange and the yellow, are very similar in certain areas in the city because we have additional policies that further restrict what can be built. The low density 1 and the low density 2 are actually identical in certain areas of the city, and they further restrict what can be built sometimes to only detached. So we also are noting one very important element is that we have 3 categories, which are the low density 1, the low density 2, and medium density, which permit low scale development, so up to 4 stories. And then we move into a high density category without anything in the middle. So we feel like there's nothing of a mid-rise kind of a category of more of a human scale that allows us to have a transition in the city. Let's move into the next slide, please. So looking at this from a different point of view, looking at it from a geographical standpoint, when we look at the colored area on the map, this is the extent of residential land use designation. So all those lands are designated to predominantly accommodate residential uses. If we look at the map on the slide, where we see yellow and light orange, those areas that are low density 1 and low density 2 make up 2/3 of the residential lands in the city of Mississauga, and they only permit a few built forms. If we read through the policies of the official plan, we'll find that only 1/3 of those areas, restrict the development to only detached. So we are further restricting what can be built in the city. And then finally, obviously, we do not see anywhere that will kind of prioritize mid-rise in any shape or form in the city. Next slide. So to summarize some of the issues that we have seen in the land use designation that we have currently, we are noticing that it is very difficult to reflect provincial intent in terms of diversifying housing options. You may, most of you may know, or some of you may know, that we have been directed by the provincial policy statement to permit a range of housing options in neighborhoods. The provincial direction is clear, especially through Bill 23, where we have to accommodate up to 3 units on lots containing a detached, a semi-detached, and a row house. Currently, with the structure that we have, it is very difficult to have that changed in the official plan. The second issue that we've noted is the complexity and the rigidity of the current designation really acts as a barrier for creating more housing options. Think of it as it relates to the example we spoke to earlier about having only detached permitted in certain areas. If you'd like to make a change, then you'd have to go through the process of amending the plan, which is a very difficult process that usually we keep for complex development applications, but you'd have to do it for what can be perceived as simple changes. There's also, again, a very clear lack of equity across neighborhoods. So the inequity happens by limiting the number of options in neighborhoods to products that tend to be financially prohibitive. When you think of the detached as a product, it tends to be the most expensive from a market standpoint. Having a neighborhood or a section of the city that only permits the most expensive the products means that some people will never have access to housing because they cannot afford it. Neighborhoods that have this kind of policy are what we call neighborhoods that have exclusionary zoning in place. This is a practice that's no longer tolerated in many official plans, and it certainly shouldn't be in ours. And then finally, there is a need for better height transition in the city, and we need to be able to look at heights and understand what's permitted where, and we need to be able to find areas where we can have more opportunities for mid-rise, so we can have more of that human scale. Next. So what are we doing to respond to those issues and those pressures? We are proposing a new residential land use designation. We're moving away from a form-based or type-based residential land use designation to one that is scale-based or height-based. So we're moving away from what can be built, or like describing the type of what can be built, to a scale kind of a designation. The designation is in front of you. You can see it. It has four categories again. The first category, which is in yellow, is the low-rise one, which allows all street-facing forms of low-rise dwellings up to 3 stories. This one will accommodate the low-density 1 and low-density 2 right now that we have in the official plan. The low-rise 2 is the light orange category, which will have all the forms of of townhouses, so stacked back-to-back and all, as well as apartment dwellings up to 4 stories, which will be exactly what we have right now in the official plan as medium density in bright orange. And then the new created category for mid-rise, which allows buildings between 5 and 8 stories. This will be an area where candidate lots for mid-rise will be created or will be designated. And then finally, our high-rise designation. This will be our high-density designation, yes, for anything beyond 8 stories, which will have also townhouses as an accessory, which is exactly what's in the official plan right now. So when we look at this designation and we look at the map later, the new map, there will be 2 very important changes that we will notice right away. And those are, and I'll speak to those in the next slide. So the very first change that we can notice on the ground and on the map is that by combining the low density 1 and low density 2, which you see on the slide, really have the detached and semi-detached flexes and townhouses, all kind of what we call neighborhood appropriate scale types of buildings. We will combine them into one category that we will call low rise, and that will accommodate any type of these elements up to 3 stories, with additional policies, obviously, that speak to land assembly, that speak to the protection of the environment, that protection of heritage. So it's a complete framework. It's not just a definition on itself, on its own. What you will notice, though, when you look at the map, is that we will have more of the yellow to replace the orange and the yellow, and which we sometimes call the yellow belt. And that would be really a true representation of what's on the ground. So from a scale standpoint, these typologies are pretty compatible, hence the use for that box analogy. It is important, however, to mention that as we do this shift, the details that have to do with every one of those built forms that lives right now in the zoning bylaw will remain there. We will not change anything related to the zoning bylaw during this project, and it will remain the same. Once the official plan is approved, we will be looking at a review of the zoning bylaw in a different project. We will probably be coming back to you to consult you on these changes, on any potential changes to the zoning bylaw to allow for more barriers to be removed. Next, please. The second substantial or noticeable aspect of the change will be the creation of mid-rise lots. So when you look at the map, and if you look at the one in front of you right now on the left side, most of our lots that contain buildings are now brown. So the lot to the left contains an 11-story building. The one on the right in the red square contains a 7-story building. So when we look at the permission within those lots and we transition to the new land use designation to the right of the screen, so you'll see that the lot containing the high rise, the 11-story, will remain brown, which means it's a high rise, and the one that contains the 7-story will be automatically redesignated as a mid rise. So we've done this for a number of lots already in the city, based on the permissions that exist there. So there are no changes to permissions. And we will keep doing this as we feel that there are more lots that could be good candidates for mid-rise. This will really create that transition, especially as we move out of the center of the neighborhood into arterial roads and transit roads, to have a transit supportive density that is adequate and appropriate for a neighborhood. You can consult these changes in an online map that we made available as part of Bundle 3. We call it the swipe map. That is because it has a swipe tool at the center. And if you swipe to the left and the right, you can see the before and after. So you can see the residential designation of your property as it is now and as it will be later. And you can kind of compare what the changes are, if any. If you feel that you need to talk to us about any of those changes, we highly encourage you to reach out to us and we can discuss any changes to your property. I think we can also put a link to that tool if you don't mind. Next, please. So outside of the designations, we are also looking at addressing the housing crisis and the need for more housing through a holistic and comprehensive approach. So we have amended chapters, the neighborhood chapter, and created a housing chapter to specifically address housing needs. So you'll find that we've added policies that provide directions for redevelopment of retail sites over 1 hectare. So those would be the plazas and the malls that we have right now in our neighborhoods. Any of those that is over 1 hectare that is in development or to be developed in the future, and some of them are. We provided some guiding framework that is at high level in terms of heights, in terms of how we can guarantee that some of that retail is kept, so we can make sure that our communities stay complete and walkable and provide all the necessary services for people to live in. We are also encouraging the creation of more family size units. We've added policies that speak to that. We've added also policies that support the protection of rental housing. As some of you know, we have a rental protection bylaw by the City of Mississauga, and we've added policies to support that bylaw. And we finally embedded and supported the regional housing targets in the housing chapter. Next. As I said earlier, in addition to housing and designations, we've made some amendments to employment, to the employment chapter and the employment areas. These are general amendments that really look at names and designations. They don't change a lot of policies. So there's a general name change to 2 employment area capture areas for clarification purposes, and those are the corporate centers, which we now refer to as office node employment areas, and the employment areas, which we now refer to as general employment areas. We also changed the designation of mixed use that existed in the general and office node employment areas to employment commercial designation, which now really makes it clear that any sensitive uses, including residential uses, are not allowed in those areas. Next slide. The final element that I will touch on tonight is the integration and simplification of strategic growth areas. As you may know, we have multiple strategic growth areas within the city. We have an urban growth center, that's the downtown. We have also nodes, and we have major transit station areas. All of these now have been brought together in the official plan and in 3 distinctive chapters. One chapter that is dedicated to major transit station areas, one that is dedicated to the urban growth center and will contain downtown policies, as well as downtown Fairview, Crooksdale, and Hospital policies as well, coming from the 2 official plan reviews that have been completed or underway. And we will have a dedicated chapter for nodes that will contain major nodes, community nodes, and office node employment area. Final slide. So I know it was a lot of information, but I just want to finish by kind of going through the timelines. Today and tonight, so I should say, we are going through the last bundle of policies, and we really would like to hear from you, and we'll continue to hear from you. The aim is to bring the entire full document, which includes bundles 1, 2, and 3 all together for consultation in Q3 of 2023. That will be in September, October, with a caveat. This really hinges on any potential changes to the provincial policy that may impact, again, the content of the official plan, as we always need to conform, as you may know. And also, we will be bringing that. So once that draft is available, we will be initiating the statutory public process. So we will hold a public open house and a public meeting, and we will seek at the end of those 2 council endorsement and eventually approval from the approval authority. That was my presentation for tonight, and I'll send it back to you, Erin. Thank you so much.